Good evening, or whatever time frame you happen to be listening to this recording podcast, Vampire Fantasy Football Forum or Nation, whichever you prefer. Today's episode is going to be a bit different, folks, and yet I don't think it should be so different of an episode. This episode, it's not going to be on who do we think of players. It's about where we are preparing for our drafts for the upcoming fantasy football season. Or how we should draft, what methods we should use to draft, what strategy should we take. Nope, this episode is going to take a little more personal note this time, but it's something I think we as fantasy gamers should pay attention to. We should be looking at this, that as we play this game, upon a game that we play. By now, we've all heard the news regarding the Washington Commanders rookie running back, Brian Robinson, how last weekend he was shot in an attempted carjacking. And I did see video of him return to the Commander's facility, and our thoughts and prayers go out to him and his family and those that have been this, and do hope him a speedy recovery and all the best. But that brings a personal note here for me, and it should for everybody. We do hope Brian Robinson is back playing again soon. We hope all safety for NFL players. As fantasy analysts, as gamers, we can get in our own heads when we talk a bit about players and how we evaluate them. There can be times where we use our analysis or film watching and we're making calls about players or, hot takes or, what we think we call players, due to their performance on the field each and every game. Whether that can be a bad performance or a good performance. But let me be one of the first here, and I'm not the only one. I won't say I am, but to say that these players that we evaluate, we talk about, we play this game that they are a part of because they're part of the NFL. These are young men. These are young men following a dream and a passion that not many people actually get to do. These are men who can do physically more than most humans can. These are gladiators. They're best of the best. They are the very top of their profession. Even those that we can call out and say that they're not very good at what they do, they're better than we are. So, to say that they are no good because of a bad performance in 1 week or having an off year, shame on us. We here at Fantasy Nation, or at Vampire Nation, I should say, we will continue to strive here in our analysis to give recognition to these players that they deserve. I've come up here on this mic and said before that we can players because of what they're able to do and yet not draft them in fantasy football because we don't want to draft them at their ADP. We can also not like a player, and not to say that someone should not like them as a person. There are cases where players will do things off the field that we don't like. This past season, we're very well aware of certain players that have done things that we would never want to associate ourselves with. That is okay. There will be players that are going to do things that we don't like or care for. People do make mistakes. People make wrong choices. But we still are playing a game upon a game. Let's not forget that. Outside of players making choices that are drastically bad and that are never okay, we should not be saying, I don't like somebody because they had an illness or they had a bad performance on a game or they tried to play through an injury and it cost us a. That doesn't matter. We should never forget we are talking about men. We are talking about people. These are not assets that you buy, sell, and trade, despite the fact that typically what we use to say when we're talking about them to buy, sell, and trade. These are people. Now that I've gone through my TED Talk, my tirade, if you are still listening, I do thank you. And I will get a little personal here because I want to address the fantasy football managers that will take time to, use social media in a bad way and call out players for their bad performances after they have one. Say, you cost me a game. How dare you be able to do that? You have your priorities messed up. We should never forget what is truly important. While fantasy football is a thing that we do, there's an excitement of, can I be the guy that picks the right person? Is my team going to be the best? Will I be crowned champion? There's an excitement of, can I do it better than anyone else in my league? It gives us a reason not only to watch our favorite team, but we get to know players. We get to know players that we drafted and cheer them on, or honestly have heartache watching because it didn't work out the way we wanted it to. But we can't forget, as fantasy football players, we cannot forget what's truly important. Every year around draft season, I'm reminded of this. I am reminded more often than just draft season, but around draft season, it hits really hard for me. If you don't want to listen, because this will be a little bit personal and you may not like it, that's fine. Don't listen. Tune into an episode where I talk more about fantasy. But we have to remember what it was. 2020. Along with everybody else that year, it did not go according to plan. Not for myself or my family. I was fortunate to be working, but it took me away from home for extended periods of time. By take away from home, it was 2 states away. And there are many people that do this on a daily or semi-regular occasion, and they do it well. This, however, wasn't what my family was used to. This was an adjustment. That year I'd been gone for about 6 months, about 5-ish months, but for the first half of the year. I know it had been July since I've been home that year. And it is still home. We were preparing for what was next, which was to be away from home for a bit. But during August, during fantasy football draft season, I was home. I ran a year at home with friends and family, and we were preparing for draft like everyone else that year. We had other questions of, is this going to happen this year? Are we going to do it? And we decided, yeah, let's do it. Why? Because we wanted the distraction. Fantasy football is a great distraction of some of the mundane things that happen in our life that we just want a break from. And I was really excited to be home for the draft that year. But the week of that draft that year in 2020, I was again asked to drive 2 states away to go pick something up, turn around, bring it home. It wasn't out of the ordinary. I wasn't too terribly excited about being away again because I'd been away for a while and didn't really want to, but it was a simple drive 10 hours, the next day drive back. Okay. The day driving back, that evening was the scheduled time for our fantasy football draft. And in our home league, we still live in the dark ages of drafting. We draft offline and input the draft results after the fact, but there's a camaraderie that comes to that, and we enjoy that. So that evening was scheduled, our fantasy football draft. And what could be better than prepping for the draft, listening and strategizing for 20 hours over 2 days on a road. Driving down, I won't ever forget. I left home early, made sure I wouldn't get in too late. I could get a great night, sleep real early, drive back home, get in early again. And I was about 45 minutes to an hour away from my destination, where I was going. Everything was going right. Then I got a phone call. And this call, when I got it, I didn't think too much of it. It was for my wife, and I wasn't out of the ordinary. I thought, just checking in or, seeing how things are going, where am I at, all that good stuff, right? But this was different, and I wasn't ready for this. When I heard her voice and what she told me, I at first didn't know how to react. And after the shock of not knowing how to react was all the emotions I had. Feeling everything at once. Being 2 states away. My wife called me from the back of an ambulance. My daughter at the time had drowned. That day, my wife took our kids to her parents to go swimming. Nothing out of the ordinary. We'd done that a lot. Folks got pool and it was great. While people were hanging out, having a good time, my daughter walked in the pool and went underwater. Now, I will brag on my wife here, who is very incredible. And she has a background in medical. She jumped into action. Our daughter had been underwater for 30 seconds to a minute. She had lost conscious. She wasn't breathing. Again, she was only 2. My wife did CPR and revived her right before the paramedics arrived. Amongst chaos of everybody that was there, that was able to happen. I will say, right before being told what happened, I was told by my wife that everything's fine. Now, I don't know about you, but being told we're in the back of an ambulance, that's not necessarily everything being fine. But I can't tell what that feeling is to feel so helpless in hearing you were 2 states away and can't do anything to prevent or help. I was to stay the night and drive back the next day. That did not happen. I picked up what I was supposed to. I called the office and I said, I'm coming home tonight. And I don't care that it's policy not to. I have to come home because my daughter needs me. I drove right through the night to get back home. And I would do it again the same way. I made it home about 4 a.m. And of course, nothing's open. But I was right there first thing in the morning at that hospital where she was being observed. I will never forget that day. And honestly, that fantasy football draft, we still had that year, that day. We went home from the hospital that evening. And about an hour or so after we got home with her, had a draft. I couldn't tell you after that year. Most days I know football players' names back and forth. It's a game that my wife says I just know too many names off the bat. But that year, I don't know what, honestly, that season looked like. I didn't win. It's fine. I was focused on something else. It was fun to have a fantasy football draft that night. But the real important thing was my daughter was home. My family was okay. And today my daughter is still growing up, now older, and being her wonderful self. That's what's important. Family is important. There are things in our lives, each of our lives, that are important. And fantasy football is fun. Trust me, it is. But don't make it the high priority in your life. Always remember that. When you get frustrated, when you think a player's done better and didn't, how dare they? You're not part of their lives. You play a game. This is a game upon a game that we play. Always remember that and keep that as your focus. Have fun at this. And guess what? I said it episode 1. I'm going to say it again. I will be wrong about how I evaluate players every year. I will not pick the right guy. I will not always have the right strategy. You won't be either. You're not going to be right none of the time. Okay. These are people. Let's remember that. Now, I do not want to end this on a very heavy note. And this has been a very heavy episode. And if you've made it, again, this far, you know a little more about me and how I view this. Fantasy football to me is very fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy it sometimes, probably a little too much. But there's a priority to it. And I won't forget that. And as I do player analysis, I will do my best to remember these are people in fantasy football priority that should be at the correct priority, not too high. But as I promised, I will not end this on a very low note. I do want to end on a fun note because I do recognize that we are in the midst of fantasy football draft season. If you drafted last year, congrats. If you're waiting, congrats too. You still have time to prep. Now, I'm not the first person to do this type of parody, and I probably won't be the last, but I decided to take a stab at it this year. It's fitting to have some humor as we remember this is a game upon a game. This is something that's so dumb, but it's so much fun. So, 'twas the night before draft day. And I'm going to go Christmas here because my wife loves Christmas. So, my daughter also loves Christmas too. It's July, or when it is summertime, she's singing Jingle Bells, and that's fine. Christmas is a fun thing to have parody. And Christmas is a great time of year. And for us, fantasy football gamers, draft day, draft season, that's a great time of year. So why not? So 'twas the night before day, and all through the house, every manager was scrambling, clicking their mouse. The rankings were set so neatly by each player in hopes of a championship to visit upon their team. Fantasy managers all nestled in the war room with visions of touchdowns to visit their players. When out of the war room, there arose such a clatter, the commissioner has stepped forth to start the draft order. Each manager scrambles with a click or a shuffle, ensuring their rankings are set for the perfect draft. With each turn calling out their players, draft Taylor, draft Akers, draft Kelsey, draft Mixon, draft Dobbins, draft Wilson, draft Connor, and draft Pittman. Names flying all over the place now before it's too late, not to be sniped, but one round too late. Until the final round and gave the last name called, the commissioner spoke the words once the final round is done, giving a nod with the final keystrokes. The rosters are set. And all a flurry I heard him explain with joy and delight. Happy draft day to all, and all a good night.